So the first animated Lord of the Rings movie in decades is finally out. And I wanted to share my opinions on it because some people really seem to hate on it. So let's cover the three major parts of it: the animation, the story, and the characters, to answer the question, is it worth seeing, especially in cinemas? So firstly, let's cover the animation, everything about the visuals. Now, Lord of the Rings, being fantasy, of course, really works well with animation. I've heard that multiple studios worked on it, but it seems quite consistent, and it has this Japanese feel because it was created mostly in Japan, but also this sort of comic booky, a little bit like manga feel, not really exactly anime. Now, like most animated movies and TV shows these days, it combines some elements of 2D and 3D graphics, and sometimes it works very well, some matte paintings, for example, in the background, but sometimes you can really tell the difference between those two styles that have been used to make that movie. Now, one thing that I've seen people point out is that the animation sometimes feels rushed, but I don't think so necessarily. I think what they are referring to is the level of detail, because in animation, especially this type of animation, you can really just blur the background and use that as depth of field or level of detail, So sometimes you have characters in the background or in some bigger groups, stuff like that. You're not going to create detailed faces, characters, their outfits and everything about them, as if they were in the foreground. If they're in the background, they're going to be less detailed, naturally. This doesn't mean that, the animation was rushed. It's just a creative decision. And some things have been rushed, of course. Some things have been created by different studios, but some things are just the creative decision that, the creative team has chosen, and you may like it, you may not, but let's not confuse where the animation was rushed with, those creative decisions, because this is not the same thing. But overall, I think it's a great start for this new era of animated Lord of the Rings movies and overall Tolkien media, and I'm very curious to see where it goes. Now, the second thing we have to discuss is the story, and also it relates a bit to animation, because the most important thing about it is that it was quite long for an animated movie, especially quite a bit over 2 hours long. In that 2 hours and some minutes, what we have to understand is that a singular story is being told, like a singular plot, because as Lord of the Rings fans, especially from the movies and the Hobbit movies, we're used to having many subplots within each and every movie, different areas, maybe even from Middle Earth, different things happening at the same time, and we have to piece things together in our mind and really observe those multiple subplots, keep them in mind, even though it's a movie and not the TV show. Sometimes, because both the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit are trilogies, each and every movie ends not with a very satisfying ending. They have to have something that they can leave out for the sequels, but here we have this one singular plot about really what the title says itself: the War of the Rohirrim. Now, it is an established plot in the Legendarium by Professor Tolkien, if I'm not mistaken, but the biggest change that was implemented is what we have to cover in the characters category, because the main character, Hera, was basically added. It was a creative addition to this movie, an original character basically. A lot of people don't like it because she was basically inserted into it and doesn't play a major part in each and every stage, of the story. Sometimes, there are 30-minute sequences where she's just a background character, and sometimes, she's being forced a little bit to, the foreground, metaphorically. And this may be really confusing sometimes. You may forget about her even at times. But overall, I think we've seen a lot worse adaptations and changes of original works in the fantasy genre, fantasy book adaptations over the past decade or so. So I think all in all, it's acceptable, again, depending on what they do with the movies later on, because now here we go into some spoilers. The movie basically sets up a possible sequel. I don't know if it's definitely going to happen, but like Gandalf is mentioned. Also, there's a cameo of Saruman. Actually, he's being shown just for a little while. You may not like it, but I think it's okay. It's nothing like obnoxious. Now, my favorite character was definitely the main villain of this whole story, at least in the movie, which was Wolf, spelled with a U. He had a really great voice actor, and overall the voice acting really is quite excellent. But the actor that played Wolf really was quite magnificent, I would even say. He played this villain, but you could almost root for him at certain times, within the movie. Like, you could see not only his reasoning, but also like his emotions seemed real and seemed almost like they could be understood by us. At least I sort of felt that, and it was really cool because, it's not like there's this black and white dynamic like, in the Lord of the Rings movies, the Hobbit movies, like a villain is so just disgusting in how they look and how they act that you will never root for him and empathize with him or them. But here you can really see the whole character progression. Again, we come back to the story a little bit. You can see the whole character progression from not even being a villain to then disappearing, going on this villain arc, and then doing some damage, let's just say. One thing that I also wasn't a big fan of is the fate, the end, and the death, again, spoiler alert, of Helm Hammerhand himself. I don't know how accurate it was to, the Lord of the Rings lore, but he sort of became like a wraith, they called him, and then basically died like a pointless death. That was not really great, but overall I think, they could have done a worse job with the characters. Again, I rooted for the villain for a little bit, so I don't know what to think about that, if that was on purpose or not. But overall, I think the characters in the story definitely hold up. It's not perfect, of course. You could say that some shortcuts were made, and also sometimes certain characters have it just too easy, like, just things happen. They're lucky that things are happening how they're happening. Just everything seems to go easy for them, and not just for the main characters, not just for the good guys always, and not always just for the villain, for everybody at different times. So definitely some plot holes, but just tiny ones, nothing really major, nothing that I've noticed at least. One other thing that I've noticed is the lack of at least like major film graying. Sometimes even when you see animated movies on the screen, on the big screen, you see a lot of film graying, and you're sort of so used to it when you're in the cinema because of the projector and the large screen size that you sort of miss it. And so with that, I think an even better experience could be just waiting to have it on streaming services or on DVD and watching it at home, because then it's definitely 100% worth seeing, especially if you're a fan of the Legendarium, the Lord of the Rings. I'm sure that you've already made up your mind, but if not, then it's definitely worth seeing. But I think that you could wait for streaming if you're not fully into going, to the cinema, to the movie theater for just an animated movie. But overall, I'm really excited for what the future holds of, the Legendarium and all sorts of Tolkien media, especially animated ones. I hope this video helped you a little bit in your decision, and that's about it. So, na ver.